The Last Faith is a 2D metroidvania Souls-like. The two games it seems like it's trying to mix up are Blasphemous and Bloodborne, which does seem like a recipe for success. The game is on pretty much every main platform and has pretty good ratings on every platform too, except for on Switch. People didn't seem to like it too much on there with all the issues it had. A bit over 2,000 ratings on Steam at very positive and a bit over 4 stars on PlayStation. But even with pretty good reviews all around, a recipe for success doesn't mean that it will end in success. I'm Sam the Ashen, and this is The Last Faith. I think one of the main things that draws people into games like these is the claim that it's a Souls-like. Can you break the barrels and the chairs? Yes, you can even throw the breakables at enemies, which is a pretty cool touch. Is there iframes? Yeah, but people seem to argue a lot about that. Do enemies respawn when you rest? Yes, along with being able to level up from the currency called Nicrux, which you get from defeating enemies. As far as the Souls-like aspects, the game does a pretty good job in bringing in the mechanics we all already know. They don't do anything crazy to make it their own, but that's not really a big deal to me. The combat was pretty enjoyable all around. There hasn't been a ton of different weapons, with the game only having 12 different ones. Although that's not a lot, each weapon does feel pretty distinct, having their own movesets and special abilities, scaling, status effects, etc. Combat consists of having your 3-hit combo with your melee weapon, with a special ability that uses focus, which is like mana, and your heavy attack, which is a charge attack. In your offhand, you can have guns and spells, with guns being your long-range option, and spells ranging from close-range pyromancy to longer-range darkblade attacks. For defensive options, you have your dodging, you also have your parry you can use from an equipment slot called a stigma, and there's also more stigmas like a shield that you get later in the game. There's also executions you can perform on stunned enemies or sometimes just randomly, and the animations are pretty cool. Definitely satisfying. It reminded me a lot of Blasphemous. Blasphemous is one of my favorite 2D Souls-likes, and the finishers from that game were such a great addition. It was nice to see them in The Last Faith too. As for the bosses, they're definitely not as inspired as a game like Blasphemous. They were cool at first, but after just 2 or 3, they really just felt kind of average. So as long as you come in with no expectations, I don't think you'll be too disappointed, but don't expect anything crazy. Overall, the combat does feel pretty good. I like the design of the weapons and the spells. The enemies are pretty fun to fight, at least for the first half of the game. Later on, they start to feel pretty spongy. There's a good amount of enemy variety, which you'll notice pretty early on. The enemy design is also pretty well done, with all of them fitting into the gothic horror vibe of the game. One of my main problems, combat and design-wise, is how focus is handled. You can either rest at your checkpoint, find a refill altar, or use consumables to replenish your focus. However, with all the backtracking that is in the game, I feel like a more renewable source of focus would have been much more enjoyable. Like defeating enemies could refill a small portion of your focus. It's not like the spells are crazy overpowered and there might need to be some rebalancing if they did do this, but I just didn't like only being able to use most spells or weapons abilities a couple of times before having to wait until the next checkpoint to use them again. This is kind of a minor complaint, but still worth mentioning, I think. As for the art design of the game, well, it's pretty beautiful. You can see the gothic horror style pretty much right away, which instantly reminded me of Bloodborne, with the guns also reminding me of Bloodborne. The locations look really nice. The enemy art is really in theme here, from guys with cleavers and guns, to robed monsters that are weirdly buff, to Lovecraftian creatures that try to latch onto you and eat you. I imagine it's tough to make the environments seem unique and different from each other while also sticking to the theme, but The Last Faith does do a pretty good job of this. There's the typical big city that looks bleak and run down, old manors that you know something inside is waiting for you. There's also crypts deep underground, a big ice area with snow flurries and sharp dead trees, and no Souls-like would be complete without the murky swamp. Luckily, this one isn't poisonous. Now for the progression of the game. The way you progress in the game is mainly by unlocking new abilities that allow you to make it to places that you couldn't have got before, like with most metroidvanias. There's also a leveling system with vitality, strength, dexterity, mind, instinct, which you level up from getting Nightcrux from defeating enemies. I like having skills to level up, and with weapons having different scaling for different attributes, I think it works well together. The abilities that you unlock usually come after defeating the area boss, which after getting, then you go back and backtrack to old areas to get to places you couldn't get before. There's nothing wrong with this system, it's a staple in Metroidvanias, but after around 30 hours in the game, and after reading some other people's thoughts to make sure I wasn't the only one, I can say that the level design is pretty lacking. The biomes are varied, the enemies are pretty varied, but the layout, the way you progress, stays pretty much the same way the whole game. This is only made worse by the slower movement pace. The upgrades you get along the way don't really help much with speeding up the pace of exploration, which hurts it even more. This wouldn't be a big problem if the exploration was actually rewarding. Most of the secret places you find, or going on a stray path, just results in a few extra healing items or consumables. This is my opinion, and I'm sure some people might prefer a slower, longer exploration, which is totally fine. I actually had a lot of trouble figuring out the right places to go. There were plenty of times that I thought I had exhausted all my options, and after spending sometimes up to a few hours, I just looked at a guide. This was on me, maybe I'm just not good at figuring out where to go next. The only tip I can give you for this is to use the marker system with your map to mark places you can't go without the right ability. It'll probably save you some time later on. It definitely would have saved me some time. Other than that, the progression is alright. The abilities are pretty spaced out, so they definitely feel important, and they're pretty cool once you get them. The story is probably hit or miss for most people, as with most games that aren't totally story focused. I won't get too into it, but it's fairly interesting, even if it's a little typical. But it definitely didn't feel like it took anything away from the game as a whole. I actually like a lot of the characters. There's full voice acting with pretty good quality. So dialogue was actually pretty enjoyable to listen to. You have a main hub at a place known as the Manor, and some characters you find out in the world can end up here at the Manor to give you side quests or to sell stuff. The side quests aren't in your face at all, it's just stuff like, if you happen to see this item while you're out and about, bring it back to me, which I think was a good call to not mess with the flow and immersion of the game. So overall, The Last Faith is a pretty decent 2D Metroidvania Souls-like, with just a few minor complaints that bothered me that probably won't bother most people that are fans of the genre, and just one bigger complaint about the level design. So if you like Souls-likes or 2D Metroidvanias, I would say you could have some fun with The Last Faith. It's less than $30 on all platforms and goes on sale pretty often. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like helps me out a lot, and any feedback in the comments helps me to grow as a channel, so it's much appreciated. If you want to see more from me, feel free to subscribe. It'd be great to have you. I post once every 2 weeks on Sunday, so I'll never clog up your feed. I hope you have a good one. Peace out.